Welcome to the Revolutionaries of Wellbeing podcast. I'm founder and host, Sarah McGuinness. The Revolutionaries of Wellbeing, or ROW, is a community of wellbeing managers from organisations around the globe. At ROW, we develop you as a wellbeing leader, giving you a powerful support network, professional development, and workplace wellbeing solutions so that you can focus on giving your employees the right support at the right time. To be stronger, better, and faster at improving wellbeing in your workplace, professional development is key. These discussions on workplace wellbeing are designed to inspire, share ideas, and raise awareness of important issues we can all take action on. The interviews are recorded as part of our monthly Wellbeing Wednesday webinars. In this episode, we chat to an expert on ADHD and explore how workplaces can better support neurodiversity. It's estimated that over 280,000 Kiwis have ADHD. People from all walks of life and all professions live and work with ADHD. But we don't really talk about how businesses can lead for and accommodate different neurotypes. I'm joined by ADHD advocate, coach, and facilitator, Callum McKirdy. Together, we discuss how we can create work environments that understand the value that people with ADHD and other forms of neurodiversity can bring, and how to support them to thrive.
A wee bit about my background is I have had 22 years in and around HR and sort of that people profession. Working my way up, I actually fell into HR accidentally, applying for the wrong job. I had such fun in the interview that they gave me a job that I wasn't necessarily qualified for. And I think there's a wee bit of the ADHD and dyslexia in there as well. So I'm 45 years of age. I've been neurodiverse my entire life, which all neurodivergent people are. But I've only been aware of my ADHD for 3 years. And I always knew that I was dyslexic. I later found out that I have dyscalculia as well, which is essentially dyslexia with numbers. And they were a real issue with school. But thankfully, my ADHD, which I didn't know I had, allowed me to cater for that, not only in the masking and the hiding that I did of my inabilities, but also my abilities too. But there was a big coping mechanism in that around, especially with ADHD, where the masters of disguise were really good at appearing normal and that we fit in, whereas internally there's a whole lot of struggle and turmoil and chaos going on in there. And I think that's really key for part of the conversation we're going to have today, Sarah, is around mental health and well-being and the hidden side of hidden diversity as well. Because while we can hide what's going on for us, sometimes we don't necessarily hide what that manifests as and how that comes out and the struggles, etc. My take on ADHD in particular around neurodiversity is I believe in, or my stance is, I guess my mindset is I'm ADHD positive. Not that I've just tested positive for it, but also I have a real positive tilt on what that means, being that all the labels, all the neurodiverse labels that exist, and those that are probably coming out of the woodwork as well, as things sort of morph a wee bit, they all have this fear, shame, and stigma attached to them. And there's a bunch of stereotypes, most of which are completely wrong. Like if we focus on ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's not a disorder. There's a wee bit of hyperactivity in some of us, but not everybody has that. So there used to be ADD, which without the hyperactivity, but it's all sort of been subsumed into the one label now. But it doesn't mean that everybody's hyperactive. I wasn't a hyperactive kid. I was a bit fidgety, but I wasn't bouncing around all the time. But I certainly have a hyperactive mind and I have a need to release energy. So I go running in the hills for hours, and that's essentially my meditation. It's like active meditation. And I have to use up some almost nervous energy in order for me to be able to focus and get clarity and process what's going on in the world, etc. Now, the attention deficit part of it is the biggest misnomer of it all. There's no deficit of attention. In fact, if anything, there's probably a deficit of the ability to pay attention to one thing at a time, because we're always like we're the hunters. Like we're noticing the movement, the sound, what else is going on, and that's not because we're not paying attention, but actually sometimes we need to move or need to be distracted in order to pay attention. So I just look around here. I do a lot of online coaching and I have a silent drum pad and I use drumsticks and I tap out on those every now and then. I've got fidget rings. I've got a whole lot of little things that I play with just so that I can pay attention. Because if I'm making little figurines out of blue tack while I'm talking to someone, I'm able to really focus in on that person. But if I was told to sit still, which I was at school, I'm not concentrating because all I'm doing is focusing on that urge and that energy that's building up like a pressure cooker in order to blurt something out or say that, right? And so I think this is the understanding we need to come to. And so I also realized that, getting back to your question, trying to circle back to it, is that with so many years in HR and in HR leadership, leading and being the champion of a whole lot of processes that actually never made sense to me, I realized that I've got all this deep knowledge in how organizations function and how we have a series of processes which are designed for that middle or the beer belly of the bell curve. And I sit at the edges of the bell curve, and people who are neurodiverse are at the edges of the bell curve. And those processes don't work for us all the time. And so as a result, it means that we're outliers, or we can be seen as problem children or disruptive, or we have our performance plateaus or peaks and troughs, often that we can't necessarily explain as well. And the key with that is that while neurodiversity is an umbrella term, like the neurodiverse conditions within that, or categories within that, are quite diverse in themselves. And so we can't sort of pigeonhole people. There's a lot of crossover. So people with dyslexia often have ADHD. People with autism often have ADHD. Not all the time, but autism and dyslexia aren't necessarily things that always go together. And they show up differently. But also the combination of whatever's going on for you means that it manifests differently in yourself. So you have an entirely different experience. And so our workplaces are designed for this sort of traditional or one-size-fits-most approach to people, and we don't necessarily fit in that. Now, I know those processes really, really well, and when I discovered that I had ADHD and, the penny dropped, I was like, hang on, I'm not that special. I've spent my life hiding at work, and I see people hiding as well. So one of my, if you want to go with the cheesy tagline that is, it's associated with neurodiversity, one of my superpowers is that I see people show up. I see energy, and I see people hiding as well. And so I'm really good at connecting with them because I know I have empathy in what it feels like to be them. Like, I don't know their experience, but I kind of have a knowing, so I can connect with those people. And so, coming back to your question around when I was diagnosed, I thought, I've got this deep expertise in HR, but I also have this lived experience as neurodivergent. What can I do with that? And it's about helping organizations be more attuned to helping people who think differently. So the organization to think differently about different thinking, for leaders to be unafraid of leading difference, and for those who are neurodivergent to be able to bring their whole selves to work, because we've hidden ourselves and kept ourselves down for so long. And now's the perfect time for us to start going, we've got some really cool things to offer, especially in this crazy world. I'm going to let you jump in there.
Well, I think what's really interesting, and I wanted to go to this as almost the next question, was around that language. And I think it's one of the things that every time we come up, we learn more about a different community or a different grouping or a different way of looking at something. I think that, like, obviously getting the language right is really important. And one of the things I noticed was you described people with dyslexia, people with ADHD, for example. What are some of the other terms that we need to be across or to understand or use in a particular way?
Yeah. Cool question. So there's the big three: autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. But also with dyslexia are dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia. There's and autism itself is a spectrum, and what we tend to do is we think of like, I grew up thinking autism was like Rain Man, which is the most extreme and one of the rarest ways that autism itself manifests as well. We've got a lot of people, if you look at the bell curve or the spectrum of autism, who would be classified, or actually people would be very surprised to hear that they have autism. Because it's like, well, you don't show up. You're not weird like that. You're not awkward. You don't blurt things out. You actually have empathy. And like, it's a ridiculous thing to suggest that people with autism don't have empathy. But because if you get if you see people with autism together, the empathy is just off the charts because they get each other. And that's the thing. But there's also Tourette's. Sometimes they include bipolar and also PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, which is, from a particular event. But some people have events happen in their lives that are so extreme and so triggering and charging that it means that the actual brain wiring, the way chemicals are produced and processed in the brain, actually changes on a permanent basis, right? And so that's why that's included in there. But across this whole umbrella term of neurodiversity, it's about the way the brain fires, is triggered, produces and processes particular chemicals, but also experiences the world that is not typical. So I guess what as humans we love to do is pair one against the other, right? So there's neurodiverse and there's neurotypical. Most people are neurotypical. However, everybody's neurodiverse, right? Nobody has the same brain. And so it's really about being neurodivergent. Like, where do we diverge in our brains and our minds and how we experience the world compared to most? That's essentially, I guess, the key with the language.
That's such a key definition. And I liked earlier that you were indicating around that impact. There was a RNZ interview yesterday, actually, I think in the afternoon with someone. I'm not sure if you heard it. I haven't listened to it yet. But one of the things they were talking about for people with ADHD is they described it as having a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes. I thought that's quite a nice way of describing it. But one of the things I've really had to learn is, there is the superpowers that go alongside it, and that can enable your well-being in lots of ways once you learn how to work with it. But it can also impact on your well-being. And what are you finding in that space? What are some things that you've seen around how that neurodiversity, neurodivergence, and well-being is linked?
It's inextricably linked. If we think about 80% of neurodivergent people are undiagnosed, so they have no idea what's going on for them. They just know that they don't fit. And the impact that has of not fitting, not just in life, but in particular in the workplace, if we focus on that, knowing that they're working extra hard in order just to appear competent, to appear normal, there's a huge pressure. Like there's an emotional toll, there's a heart, there's a head toll, there's the physical toll on that as well. There's a worry of what am I going to do? What am I going to be faced with? How am I going to get through the day, right? So imposter syndrome is rife within the neurodivergent categories or cohorts within workplaces. And every workplace has a contingent of neurodivergent staff. Like, we just don't know often who they are, if they're undiagnosed or they're really good at masking as well. There were some great stats in a book called ADHD 2.0 by a guy called Ned Hallowell. He was quoting Dr. Russell Barkley, who's kind of a preeminent, for a good couple of decades, he's been the researcher or the lead voice around diagnosis, but also managing ADHD. And he said that from a public health standpoint, ADHD is pretty bad in the US, sort of underplaying it a little bit just by calling it pretty bad. But he goes on to say that smoking decreases life expectancy by about 2.5 years. And if you smoke 20 cigarettes or more a day for a number of years, you decrease your life expectancy by about 6.5 years. Heart disease and obesity affect life expectancy by about 3 years. Even high cholesterol, which is kind of challenged these days as well, is said to reduce your life expectancy by about 1 year, right? And then he goes on to say having ADHD reduces life expectancy more than the top 5 public health killers in the US combined, because he said that for a third of people with ADHD, your life expectancy is reduced by about 13 years on average. And 2/3 of people with ADHD have their life expectancy reduced by 21 years, which is ridiculous, because almost a quarter of a century taken off your life simply by having something that you're born with, right? The way you are physically, physiologically, neurologically wired is, and that's a shocker. And the reason for that is because we are risk takers, so we're at greater risk of accidental death or injury, but also suicide statistics, suicide numbers, cases, etc., are overrepresented by people with ADHD. Now, that's just ADHD in itself. And so it's huge. Yet ADHD is also considered the most treatable in psychiatry. Like, we have the best medications and strategies with the highest efficacy. So it's a highly sort of treatable, but it's also misunderstood generally in society. And so being neurodivergent comes with a whole lot of pressure that, and especially in a world, like if we think now, I think of teens with social media, the need, the drive, the desire just to fit in, and not feeling like you fit in, the pressure of that can be huge. And it's the same in our workplace, where we expect people just to fit a particular mold. And so mental health, huge impact. General well-being, we're also not great at taking care of ourselves, because we're always go, go, go. And we put off the things that we think we can do later, or if there are repeatable tasks like exercise, like healthy eating, this time now doesn't necessarily matter. I think also about ADHD, there's a concept called time blindness, where a lot of people with ADHD, the concept of time is now and not now. So 2 minutes and 2 years from now have the same sort of gravitas. They're the same thing. I have very little, I don't have a consequence radar. I've got very low tolerance for risk awareness. And so what that means is I'm always in the moment. Planning stuff is not a waste of time, but it's really useful but I find it really hard to stick to things. And so there's a whole lot of actually planning and prioritizing our own well-being is something we really struggle with because, excuse the pun, we're just not wired that way. Does that sort of answer?
Yeah, totally. And I can tell you that in terms of that time blindness, one of the strategies I now use is I have a timer on my watch. And so if I know that I need to do something in a certain amount of time, like say I need to leave for an appointment in an hour, I will actually set the timer on my watch for an hour to remind myself and to know that that's how much time I have, because I can't trust myself to look at a clock and, all those sorts of things. Time is just not a thing.
Absolutely. They also say that nothing ruins an ADHD's day more than a 3 p.m. appointment. Like just you get nothing done.
It's like you're in a holding pattern, aren't you?
Yeah, you
all
are.
day.
Yeah, you're stuck. Absolutely stuck. And as an adult, as a professional, that's a lot of procrastination. That's a lot of time wasting. But also, I think there have been cases where I've had 10 minutes before a coaching call or a group session starting up, and I look outside and I go, "Oh, the wind, the lawns are a bit long. I reckon I can get the lawns done." In that 10 minutes. Now, of course, it's a half-hour job. And so I'm there and I'm mowing the lawns and I'm smashing it and I'm loving the pattern that I'm doing, that sort of thing. And then 25 minutes in, I'm thinking, I'm meant to be somewhere else, And so this was a few years ago, right? And so I've got things in place to make sure I'm never late. In fact, I'm the most punctual person I know, but I've had to do that as well. But also there's the flip side. Like with my dyslexia, people think, well, you can assume that I'm a really bad reader, which I'm not a great reader. I'm a slow reader and I find reading really, really taxing. And because for every word, I have to create an image for that. And that obviously that image changes depending on what the subsequent word is, right? Because we're describing an image or a collage of things there as well. So what that means is when I see a particular word, the combination of letters there, which I may not necessarily read correctly, but I kind of just, I see that and the image happens. But if a word is misspelled, it's incorrect, I can't create an image from that. And as a result, I notice the misspelling. So while I'm a slow writer and I'm a slow reader, I'm a really good editor. Like I'm amazing at finding spelling mistakes and things that don't gel, because the flow of creating the image through a sentence means it's hard for me. And so I think that's one way of taking something that is seen as a negative and popping it into a positive. There are lots of really good dyslexic editors because we come about things a wee bit differently.
And that's so powerful. It's actually one of the other terms I was just thinking about when you're talking about the time blindness. My other favorite one out of ADHD is the ADHD tax, which is all the things that we hyper focus on for a very short period of time, and the new habits that we take up or whatever, which last all of about 5 minutes, and then they hit the pile of other things that we're no longer interested in, but we've hyper focused on something else. So I thought maybe would you better talk a little bit about that? And I suppose that's almost that superpower thing, right? There are certain things that we can do, so the hyper focusing, which enable us to be amazing, But there are also things that are challenges. And that term superpower, not everyone with ADHD or, loves that idea, but yeah, talk a little bit about that. It would be really interesting to understand.
Yeah, so you can call a superpower a gift, a talent, a trait, a particular skill, maybe honed over time as well. A lot of those sort of superpowers, people with ADHD or dyslexia, even autism, any sort of neurodivergence, we don't actually know exists because we have we don't focus on those. We think the things we see in other people are what society values, right? And so we focus on those things. Whereas the rare things that we can do that come really naturally, right? So that are easy for us to do, we think nobody's interested in that. Like, that doesn't necessarily matter. So we downplay our superpowers and our abilities. And I think also with that ADHD tax, I think like that's absolutely fascinating, especially as you describe it, Sarah, sort of the popping ideas out and needing to get that out, otherwise it's lost. Because the way my mind works is I've got images firing all the time. If I don't grab onto those, they're gone, right? And so if we think about that ADHD tax, here's a specific example. So I have a business manager, and I'm always firing through to them all these crazy ideas, things I would love to do, things I think we need to do. Now, they are of highest priority. It's like, drop everything, do this. Now, we have an agreement that all my ideas, whether I fire them through on text, on WhatsApp, voice messages, anything, they go into a sort of a database of Callum's crazy ideas. If I don't mention those within the next week, they just get deleted, right? Because I fire them out, because they will be. It's almost like the process of getting it out is done. I open emails. As I read an email, I'm responding to that in my head, and I think I've responded. And I just leave people hanging, right? And so I've got to make sure, I've really got to make sure that I'm conscious of following up on those sorts of things. Now, often with that Callum's Crazy Ideas file, they'll come back to me, and I will never remember. It'll be like, you're reading these things out to me, and it's the first time I've heard it. It's like, or I'll go, no, I'm not interested in that anymore. It doesn't matter, right? So we need that week. Otherwise, the team will go off and do a whole lot of work, and then I'll be going, oh, I don't care about that, in a week's time, which is so disheartening for them, right? And we had to come up with this process because they were like, we're doing all this work, and after a week you go, it's no longer valid. And it's not me trying to, excuse the expression, shit on their work, but it's me just going, no, moved on, because we just have to get some things out. And it's the same as the fidgety kid as well. We've got to move and blurt some things out, because if we don't get it out, it'll get lost, because we can't hold on to. It's called working memory. I have very little working memory, and so I get lost in conversation. I get lost in the back and forth as well. I get lost in processes. I have sequential dyslexia, which means that checking in at the Air New Zealand kiosk, I get lost in the screens. One of my kryptonites is going into an organization and having to sign in on an iPad. I know all the screens that are going to appear. I know what should come up, but I don't know if I've already done that one. And so I just panic and I get it wrong, and I do things and I get stuck, or I don't see, the next button, all these sorts of things. And so there's a working memory element in there, which is my ADHD tax. I have to get it out, otherwise it's gone. And so we can seem impatient. We can seem absent-minded. But if also you can flip that into there's an immense ability in that to quickly move on, right? To go, if that didn't work, let's move on to this, right? So we're not the dwellers. We may reflect and ruminate, late at night, so we can't sleep, but actually in the moment, in, say, a high-paced environment, we don't necessarily take on what's going on there. So we're able to go through a particular process. Great in a crisis, great in fast-paced work, great at brainstorming, great at pulling apart ideas but not attaching ourselves to a particular idea like a lot of people do. Yeah, amazing in emergency departments.
So I was at this founders dinner last night, and it was all the founders of sort of high growth businesses in Queenstown, and they were talking about just about everyone at the table. It was so interesting because I was talking about my story, and then Olivia, who's the CEO of Startup Queenstown Lakes, she has ADHD, and the business chair has ADHD, and they were talking about actually probably about 95% of us in the room had ADHD, and we were talking about how that whole entrepreneurial, piece is often led by people, but you need that other person who grounds your ideas and turns them into something. Otherwise, you become 100%. An entrepreneur of lots of things and a developer of nothing.
Oh, no, that's exactly right. And so this is why in our workplaces we've got to harness neurodiversity, because there's some great stuff that we can do, value add, but there's also the things that, non-neurodivergent people also need to do and can help with, right? So it's them and us as opposed to them or us. And so this is a perfect piece in the conversation around it's not about saying, poor neurodiverse people who have been forgotten about or bashed down, kept down, glass ceiling, all that sort of thing, which is often self-imposed as well. But there are some mechanisms that don't work for us in workplaces. But it's a value add. We need to find more people who are neurodiverse in our organizations. We've already got them. How do we harness them a wee bit more? And if we think about that entrepreneurial spirit that you've just raised, Sarah, that like all the business gurus that unfortunately most of them tend to be males, because that's the perspective that a lot of books have been written traditionally anyway. You think of your Elon Musk and your Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and all that, they're all neurodivergent. If you think about, and because of that, things don't work for them. The system doesn't work, so they try and break the system or create a new system. So that entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well with ADHD, with dyslexia, with hyperfocus of ADHD and autism as well. If you think about people who thrive in acting, Tom Cruise, Orlando Bloom, Keira Knightley, bunch of people who are all neurodiverse. Johnny Depp, dodgy. Will Smith, don't know if we still, claim him up there as well. But there's, ADHD and dyslexia is really, really big there. Same with singers, will.i.am, Sia, Justin Timberlake. No, they're all neurodivergent. Think of sports stars, David Beckham, Lewis Hamilton, Simone Biles, that excellent gymnast. She accredits ADHD, her success, to her ADHD. Firstly, getting her into gymnastics, but also her ability to train bloody hard to just nail stuff that don't feel right? Because I think ADHD is not just about the mind, but it's physical as well. There's a whole lot of there's a connection with the body and balance. Like, I'm convinced it's holistic. Michael Phelps, 8 Olympic gold medals as well, that he attributes his success in the pool to his ADHD. And so we can look at these people and go, they should not have succeeded, but they succeed because of their neurodivergence. And I think that's the beauty of it. Now, if we go back to the entrepreneurs with the books and the business gurus, Richard Branson, there's another one there. These are people who neurotypicals and the majority of people want to be like, and they can never be like them. They can't replicate that success, but you can create your own success. I think it's just ironic that we've stereotyped negatively neurodivergence, and yet we've held people, Einstein, absolutely, Da Vinci, apparently. Who knows? So it's out. So we hold people up, but we also keep people down. And it's this within this middle ground where we need to close the gap. And I think we need to close the gap because of the well-being impacts of not harnessing, not allowing people to be themselves at work, not accepting neurodivergence because we tell people they don't fit. And I think actually what we should do is throw out this whole concept of fit. It's utter rubbish. Utter rubbish.
Well, I want to ask 2 questions there. So the first bit is around harnessing. So how do we harness? What are some really good examples of how we've harnessed it? And then almost the second piece of that is, have we got rid of fit then? Or how does that fit into a really good environment for those who are neurodiverse or neurodivergent?
Look, I believe in values fit, in culture add in terms of fit, but I don't believe... But what fit gets interpreted as by weak managers is recruiting people with minds like mine, right? People who I have some sort of affinity bias to, who I go, they seem like me, so they'll be easy to manage. As opposed to, where are our gaps in our thinking? Where are our gaps in behaving? Where are our gaps in how we come about understanding a problem or problem solving or whatever the core of the reason our team exists? Where are our gaps in that? And how do we fill those things? And it's the leader's job to create the environment where everyone thrives, right? Which means connecting with the individual. It also means making it safe for people to disclose some stuff. And it starts at that recruitment process by saying, here are our values. Like in the application form, if we still have those, these are our organizational values. What's really important to us is this one in this particular process, because that's about bringing your whole self. If you identify with or have been diagnosed with any of these neurodivergent conditions, please let us know. That's not because we want to use that as an excuse or a reason to discount you, because it's what we want to have a conversation about in terms of accommodations, but also how we make you feel great to come and be the best version. Like, how can we actually harness that? So some organizations are doing that, but not many. Often, neurodiversity being harnessed is seen as tech companies looking for dyslexic skills because they're good coders, good at finding holes in things, just the way I read as well, and am a good editor. Often ADHD is targeted or tagged with creativity. And so we think marketing, and we think art, design, all those sorts of things. And that's all true. Often we think finance and IT is a big sort of gateway for or opportunity for people with autism. All that's true as well. However, there's a whole lot of spaces where we can harness neurodiversity more. And yes, Air New Zealand are doing some great things there. New Zealand Defence Force are starting to open up about things. If you look at GCSB and SIS, they are targeting some specific types of neurodiversity as well for that hyper-focus, for that, I guess, particular bent or particular skill. But that's getting really narrow, and it's not about the whole person. So what I'm looking for is for organisations to look at neurodiversity as the next step in how we create an environment for everyone to thrive. Because anything you do for a neurodivergent staff member benefits a neurotypical one. Because it's about having the conversation. It's about asking, what's going on? This is what I've noticed in you. This is where I see this show up. What's going on? Is there anything you want to tell me? And to make that safe, but also to go, I think you're amazing at this. Like, how do you always join the dots between things that initially to me, like, it doesn't make sense. I don't see how you join those dots. And here's something about ADHD is that we often cannot explain how we have linked things. And so that's where we come unstuck and say a brainstorming session. We go, these things are inextricably linked, but we can't explain why. We just know they are. And so we need to develop the trust within the teams for people to go, Callum's got this. Like, I don't get it, but I know 15 minutes time, we're going to get there, or whatever it is, right? And so it's about the harnessing is actually about uncovering. So make it safe to uncover and disclose, to unlock neurodiversity as well, because some people are stuck, they're trapped. That could be the systems that are used in the organization, or it could be the person themselves, their sense of self-worth, what they think is actually of value, where they can contribute. And so there's uncover, unlock, and then there's unleash. And it's like, just let's not have jobs or workplaces that constrain people because we're looking in our teams where we always converge. Actually, where do we diverge? And how do we make that a good thing in our team? Like, how do we leverage our difference? Let's just imagine a lot of people here will be part of a team. So think about the team you're in, or even just imagine that everybody here in the gallery, we're all one team. This team and the team that you're in, neither of those are replicated anywhere on the planet. There are not many workplaces, there are not many leaders and teams that are making the most of that uniqueness. And that's what harnessing neurodiversity can do. It can bring to the surface how we view the difference that we have across our team. Because the opportunity and the potential in this team, in your specific team, that's huge. But not many people are leveraging the difference because we're trying to fit ourselves in into this sort of sea of sameness. And so harnessing is acknowledging we differ on some stuff. What do we think of those differences? And what are we going to do about it? Because it's not about shutting down or closing differences. It's about going, let's let Callum do this. Let's let Chris do that. Sarah, you go off and do this. And let's come back and go, where did we get to? Yeah, because there's too much goodness that's just going to waste. I don't know if that answers your question, Sarah.
Well, actually, no. Now my brain's moved on to another question on the back of that, which is I was thinking about that whole strengths and weaknesses and difference thing. And isn't it like from an HR perspective, certainly like in the early 2000s, we were really focused on personality. Myers-Briggs, that's how we do difference. This feels like a maturity of actually understanding what difference looks like. Certainly personality still plays a part of it, but there are other aspects as well. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Like, so the most, well-known aspect of Myers-Briggs is introversion versus extroversion. I always thought I was an introvert, but and I always showed up that way. So I actually tricked, MBTI many, many times to come out as being an introvert, because I can remember going, I get my energy from my downtime, that sort of thing. But actually what I was doing is getting to the end of the day exhausted, performing, playing the role, looking like I fitted in. And so I was just absolutely knackered. But once I learned about my ADHD and, things started to make sense, and I've explored that a hell of a lot more, I've realized that I'm heavily extroverted because I now own myself. I'm now almost entirely, not 100%, but almost entirely comfortable with who I am and what my ADHD means that I am within me and with other people, that I'm able to be that in front of people. And that shows up as being a bit more extroverted. I want to be around people a bit more. I get my energy from being with groups as well, which is almost the opposite of what introversion is. And so I can play both games as well, which most people can, right? Because it's a performance and it's a sliding scale. It's just where you get your energy from. So I think there is a maturity there, but the maturity of where you fit in all those sort of diagnostic tools is, well, where do you fit with yourself? Where do you, what's going on? What are you continuing to hide? And why is that? Because I don't think any of those sort of personality diagnostics necessarily dig into or help. I think what they do is they reinforce the person we want to be as well. And it's also in the way that those questions are structured as well. But I think this conversation around neurodivergence and the implications on well-being really stem from, how do we make it really easy for people to accept themselves, and for us as organizations, as employers, as managers, to say, we love all that about you. Because here's the one thing I do know, is that in masking whatever's going on for you and hiding all of that sort of thing, you think you're doing an amazing job at that. And yet there are often the things that we're hiding are the things that people love about us. So they know that anyway. And so when we say, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, they go, well, of course, like, you're the only person in the world who doesn't know that, or people tell us the things that they love about us. And you go, I've spent 45 years trying to hide that, trying to mask that, because I didn't think anybody valued that. And they say, that's exactly what we love you for, Callum. So, we create the sense of self as self-protection, which often is not what other people see in us. And I think the mental, the emotional toll on us is huge. The wasted energy and effort and sleepless nights for entire lives is just unnecessary. So if we can just make it, okay for people to go, I've got this going on for me, and I might need some accommodations over here, but it also means that I'm able to do these things. Because the negatives of neurodivergence, of any of those conditions, the negatives are real, 100% real. I do not downplay those. Struggle with it every single day. Lots of micro failures all the time. However, they are nothing compared to the ripples, the spectrum of what neurodivergence can be if people own it and we allow our staff and our people to own who they are at work. That's the key.
That's the gold. And it leads actually really nicely into a conversation around that psychological safety. We often come to this from a mental health perspective, being able to talk about if you're feeling depressed or anxious or any of those things. But actually, that is about bringing that whole self and being really upfront about it. Because interesting, if I go back to the dinner last night, quite a few of the founders were saying that they have trouble sharing with their staff that they have, because they want to be seen as a pillar that people can lean against, like the solid one, the stable one, the one who's got everything together. Whereas it's quite funny, I was saying, I feel like my ADHD often doesn't give me a filter, so I have no problem telling anybody. But obviously there's still that reticence that people have about sharing this because it doesn't feel like a safe thing to share. And so what are some of the things that you've seen in workplaces, even like little micro things that organizations have done, and perhaps some of the advice you might give to people in the room around what are some of the little things we can do to start to make people feel safe to talk about it and to welcome people to bring their whole selves to work?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're the leader of anybody, there's, Brene Brown's, been harping on about this for quite some time, but, the power of vulnerability. And often being vulnerable isn't necessarily vulnerable as well. It's like, or we don't need to be brave or show courage to be our whole selves. But the model of the leader who is, bulletproof or the superhero, like that, those days are gone. The most relatable leader is, the leader of the future. And that's why I think that it's really important for us to be able to talk about what's going on for us so that we close the gap between the superhero leader and the team, the rest of the staff, right? And talk about, I'm really struggling for this, or I'm taking a mental health day, or I'm doing whatever it is. So the key, I think about courageous conversations. Like, remember that back in the day? Like, what a shocker. What a waste of time and energy, because we put people on those programs who are never going to be able to have the courageous conversations. The only way we talk about the stuff that's really hard to talk about is if we talk about the stuff that's really easy to talk about a lot more. So talk about the positives. And as a result, we get onto the negatives, right? Because it's about starting the conversation. So in where I've seen teams and organizations, I guess, be vulnerable to create that psychological safety is where they make it part and parcel of their team meetings, daily check-ins. How are we going? What's hard for you right now? Asking questions like, what are you working on? How's that going? How can I help? And the how can I help is not how can I do your job for you, but what can I do to minimize the burden, to take some stuff out? Can I block some time out of your calendar? Can I be the contact point for some people who are going to harass you for the next 3 hours? Just to buy you some time, or do you need some clarity on some stuff? But having some real conversations around what's hard in your job, rather than thinking that we have to be the superhero in the job and always get stuff right, because our jobs are framed up completely wrong. Like that job description, which says you do this, 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 and you need to be able to complete this process from start to finish, plus do anything else as required, just makes us robotic, but also incompetent, because we can't do all of that to the same level. So I've seen teams talk about their job descriptions and going, right, there's some stuff in here that we can't change. It has to be done. But there's some people who are really into that part of it and some people who are really into this stuff. And like, how can we share work around? So dividing up the job description as opposed to dividing up the work across the team, etc. So it's just sort of flipping our take on, what is the work? That can make it a bit easier. But I think also having the conversations, and New Zealand organizations, and New Zealand being the most passive-aggressive nation on the planet, means that we fear conflict. It means that we need to appear to be competent and look like we're doing things. We fear the conversation we need to have tomorrow, or asking for help, all these sorts of things. And so we don't. So leaders that ask for help, leaders that explain why they're delegating things to a certain person, like that's really useful. Like actually going to the next level of the conversation, as opposed to reinforcing the difference between the hierarchy, the leader becoming a member of the team, doing some of the work as well. Like it's just a slice of the team pie. That's what leadership is, as opposed to the owner of the pie or the person who's going to eat the damn thing. It's like, that's how we create the psychological safety in order for us to raise to the surface our struggles, but also the things that we're really good at that we might be hiding.
Thanks again for listening today. It's been great to have you along. If you're keen to join the Revolutionaries of Wellbeing, head to Wellbeing, that's ROW wellbeing.com, and follow the links to sign up. If you're in our community, thanks again, and we look forward to catching up with you really soon.